Hello everyone, Fluff here. So today I'm going to be bringing you an ANVIL tier list video where I'm going to go over all the breakers in a solo speedrun setting. I say it like this because in a multiplayer setting, different positions and stuff on this list will look drastically different. Um, I would have different opinions about each breaker as well, depending on a multiplayer setting. So please don't take this as a do not play or do play sort of list. Play what you want. This game, everything works, everything is fun. Things will just have an easier time depending on the content you put in. To give some background to myself, in case you're clicking on this video, this is the first time you're seeing me or seeing this channel and don't really know much about me. I am Fluff, I am a community moderator for the game. I am also the rank 1 speedrunner on Steam when it comes to multiplayer seasonal and multiplayer extreme. In all seasons prior to this one, I have also been rank 1 for Xbox and seasonal as well. I have around 1,400 hours played on the game across 2 accounts on Steam, plus then a few hundred hours more on Xbox added, so roughly around 1.6. Just to give some background to me. To start the list, we have 4 categories. We have S, A, B, and Please Buff. So S is going to be the best breakers that are currently in the speedrunning category for solo. These are going to be either their damage is insane to the point where they're just blasting bosses and it's killing them so fast that they're just saving time based on just pure DPS, or it's going to be they can manipulate things in a certain way to the point where they have good damage, but because it's only good damage, but they can do these other mechanics, they can push times that other breakers can't because of just manipulation. So to start, in A, we also have the breakers that can do all of that, but just not as well as the ones that are in S tier. This will basically be the sort of benchmark of where we want the game to be balanced. So basically bring the things that would be in S down to A, and the things that will be in B up to A, and things that from Please Buff to being like low A, or just better in general. B tier are going to be the breakers that just struggle in that sort of setting. They either don't have the things needed to manipulate bosses, or they just don't have the damage that's required to be able to actually speedrun to a reasonable pace. And Please Buff are just the breakers that have an identity crisis and just struggle and are just in such a bad state currently to the point where they just can't exist really in a speedrun. Outside of speedrunning, they can still perform fine. They don't have crazy damage, but like if you can build team comps around them and they can still find a place. That being said, let's start. So S tier. Well, let's not go S tier. Let's start with Liner. Liner fits comfortably in the A tier. He would sit around here. The position on these bars are going to matter, so the left side is going to be the ones that are slightly better than the ones that are going to be over here. Liner is a weapon-based breaker, so he already drops down a tier because of this. Weapons just don't perform to the same category as skills do. Skills, because of the fact they're affected by more intrinsic multipliers that are present within the game, just end up naturally outshining weapon-based breakers. But out of weapon-based breakers, Liner does really well. He has critical chance based on his tripwire upgrade, which means he can ignore the crasher shotgun. Means that he immediately starts with a massive DPS boon because he's not having to look for crit chance relics. He can get the Venom Rifle, which is the highest DPSing weapon in any weapon build, and then also comes with poison, so he has poison element immediately available to him as well. He does have the issue of having burn as his main element with his skills. This really drags him back because in Campanella, if you're not aware, Campanella normal and extreme, the last boss is always Protean Beast. Like, he's the static boss, he's always in that pool along with Arctic Gear, but Protean Beast is immune to burn because he's a bioplanet. So this means he's not going to be able to make use of his acceleration module upgrade, which increases his damage towards burn targets, which is a global multiplier. Not being able to utilize these things hurts your damage a lot. But he can get access to reactors in his runs as well, which means he'll be able to freeze or petrify bosses relatively easily because he's going to have a lot of attack speed from acceleration module. He's very consistent. He's just not that quick in comparison to things that are going to be above him. Draken. Now, Draken is going to fit easily right here. Draken, this might surprise people, he hits really hard. Like, he can hit really hard, and his DPS is crazy. But in a speedrun setting, he falls shy because of the fact his animation speeds are so long. His hack and slash, really long animation. You're suspended during the entire time. Blade Shock, really long animation. The damage doesn't come down there as fast. He has crazy intrinsic multipliers. He has various ways to increase his skill power to the point where his runs are very consistent because of it. He has Defense Shred. Defense Shred is very powerful. If you can get access to Defense Shred on a character, it's extremely powerful. He has got Bleed, and in the later bosses, that's really important. That can proc and deal lots of damage, like incredible amounts of damage, as it scales from enemy max HP, and can crit. He can get the Crasher Shotgun drop for him within the runs, which lets him utilize things like Critical Power Magazine, as well as giving him 100% crit when he fires it. This is very important, and is going to be a common theme you're going to see with a lot of the medium breakers that get positioned on this list. All these are great things. Now, Bleed. As much as it was a good thing, it's also a bad thing, because this is when you get to Arctic gear, he is going to be immune to Bleed, and he's also a static boss that's always in the pool. In seasonal, it's great because you can avoid these type of bosses quite easily, but in extreme, you can't avoid them. But he is also then limited by his animation speed, so this is why he sits at A. Now, the next on this list, Elsa. Elsa actually performs reasonably well on this list. She has some drawbacks that are similar to Draken. So she uses Frozen Target instead of Bleed Targets in her builds. So what I mean by this is their skill upgrades. They can get target-based upgrades, which will increase their damage if an enemy is in that element. Unfortunately, if an enemy is from a biome that is of that element, so ice planets, freeze, they are immune to the frozen debuff, which means that she will not be able to utilize these. A lot of her upgrades are pertained around her having these. She has good damage. She can scale really well with her beasts. She can scale really well with her beam. She can scale really well because she could defense shred. But she is drawn back by her cooldowns, and she is drawn back by these frozen target. Once she gets to Protean Beast, though, if she has a good run going and she has all her beam upgrades, she has a beast upgrades that she needs, she has a defense shred as well as some frozen target upgrades, she can one cycle phases on Protean Beast like no tomorrows. It'll pretty much be Beast, Ice Wave, Beam, next phase. Beast, Ice Wave, Beam, next phase. It's really quick. It's really, really good. It's just that her getting to that point is relatively sluggish. Moving over to Quake. Quake is much like... he's not bad, but he's not good. I don't know how to really explain that too well, but I'll try. He has the Draken problem in terms of his tremors have long, like, delays which cannot be shortened between each tick. He has great CC, which is good for transitioning bosses, and I'll touch on that more when we get to the more important characters in a second. So he has great CC, thanks to his Spiral Field, which can apply Petrify. He has various ways of defense shredding. He can get defense shred on Spiral Punches and on Tremors. But he's got this issue of, on bosses like Sandshark, Medusa, and Arctic Gear, Arctic Gear being when he gets to the last phase and rushes to the edge of the room. If he fires off his Spiral Punches and it bounces off of the boss like once or twice, if it connects with the back wall that the boss is like idled next to, it will just delete the punches, and he loses amazing DPS values from that. Also loses buff stacks for himself, as well as defense shredding on the boss, which really harms him and his pacing of his runs. He does get access to the Venom Caster, which is great, which means that he'll be able to use Critical Power Magazine, etc., and also have the Poison Element granted to him via those means. But these animation times and the clunkiness of bosses just destroying your projectiles on walls leaves him running on the slower end of things due to the fact he can't be that consistent in his runs. Moving over to our next breaker, we are going to do Shuri. So Shuri, everything I just said about transitioning bosses, she can do extremely well thanks to her low cooldown on Tornado. And she can buff herself for increasing damage to petrified targets by 100%. This is incredibly powerful considering her main element is Petrify, and she can do it often. She is a weapon-based breaker, unfortunately. I do have a video on this channel, though, with a meme build where I run tornadoes and do a pretty good time running a skill build tornado. But her best build is going to be assault handguns, infinite mag with lots of attack speed from her gust wind, petrifying with tornadoes, and just really unloading and going to town on certain boss frames. And I can't put that enough. You have to catch in a certain frames on bosses to be able to really maximize your uptime. But she's really consistent, so for that, she sits very comfortably at the front, as she's faster than Liner because she could transition bosses. Next, we're going to talk about Lightning. Lightning sits comfortably in the middle of S. Lightning used to be the top dog. He used to be the face of ANVIL. He used to be the #1 DPS breaker in the game. He had Shock. Shock is very powerful. It is a 50% defense shred. It has incredibly high base damage. He's very survivable based on his low survival cooldown, low survival skill cooldown, being able to be spammed, giving him iframes 24/7. Lightning Slide, giving him iframes whilst also doing good damage. The main drawback he has is how reliant he is on stuff like Special Charge Module. If he gets unlucky and doesn't get a proc, so it doesn't reset one of his main skills, being Lightning Slide or Shockwave, then his DPS just hits a wall, and you have to wait for the cooldown to go back up before you actually are useful again. Another issue he has is that one of the other breakers out also in this tier just can do his job better. But he still does whatever he does better than people that would be in A, so it's only fair that he still remains in the S tier. Talking about Bronte. So Bronte, I honestly don't think she needs buffs. She doesn't do great damage, but in a multiplayer setting, she is insane for what she could do. But in a solo setting, I have to rate her low because her DPS is just bad. If they buff her damage, she can quite easily sit comfortably in A tier, even S tier if they buff it enough. But right now, with how she is currently balanced, she has to sit in B. If this was a multiplayer tier list, though, do not get me wrong, she is S tier. Just because of what she could do for her team. But for now, she's in B. She has issues of just her skills hitting relatively low. So even if you scale them up, they still only hit to like an average what Lightning would be hitting with a starting setup. She's got relatively low cooldowns. She can buff herself a lot, so in weapon builds she can perform alright, which is why you'll see on this channel, in the extreme run I did on her solo, I used a weapon build. But she is limited by the fact that her skills are relatively bad in terms of damage. Like, Eye of Plasma just doesn't scale well. Moving on over to Sandman. Sandman is the king. This might surprise a lot of people that he is the #1, but in a solo setting, and even multiplayer, in a solo setting, Sandman's damage is exceptional. It's not the highest damage that you'll see in the game. It's exceptional, though. But he can also do everything I said about transitioning on Shuri. He can do that better, because he doesn't have to wait for a cooldown for it. What he can do is he can use his survival skill to catch frames before they even have chance to register, really. He can also use his Petrify on his Sand Snipe, as well as Defense Shred available to him. He has various ways of getting crit damage via his Power Shield. He has access to the Crasher Shotgun instantly because he could start with it, which means he's going to have very consistent runs. As well as all of this, he can one-phase bosses per Sand Snipe solo quite comfortably. He is the top dog. There's a reason why in my channel you'll see the solo speedrun I did for him on Cabanella Extreme. And the ways that I did that was by transitioning bosses and catching frames, which no other breaker can do as well as he can. It's only fair that I now mention the next breaker, though, which is the top damage king, which is Jungler. Jungler, in an absolute perfect run, Jungler can just one-bang every boss. He can drop one mine and the boss will die. With exception to the later planets of Protean Beast and stuff, you'll actually have to do phases. This is where Sandman beats him, because where he is drawn back by the phasing, Sandman's not. But you can't argue with the fact that with how much damage jungler does and just spamming mines and being able to crossfire, even in seasonal, he is just insane. Like, the highest DPS record in the game is done with a jungler. Even solo and in multiplayer. Now, if you couple both Sandman and jungler in multiplayer, that's the meta. Like, double jungler Sandman is just crazy. You'll have insane times if you get really good at it. The game will just be a joke to you. Moving over to Guillotine, who is going to be our last addition that goes into the S tier. Guillotine, in Extreme, he doesn't perform that great. In Extreme, he just performs great. But in Seasonal, he performs extremely great. He is amazing. He has got the same drawbacks as what Draken has in terms of skill hang time, so he slows down a little bit because of that, and is the reason why he's not further up on this list. But where Draken hits a wall with his damage due to not being able to scale it further, Guillotine ignores that. In Seasonal, you will gain crit damage every time you kill a target because of his passive, which means once you have your alien nests killed and you've killed 93 alien nests, that's 93% more crit damage. He is really good at scaling up for executioner damage, and for this reason, he can bang bosses pretty heavily and sits comfortably in the S tier. Moving over to our first character that we're going to be putting in Please Buff. Mountain. Mountain is the worst breaker in this game. He has an issue of he doesn't do damage, and he has an identity where the devs, I feel like, have tried making him a tank. So when you counterattack as Mountain, if you didn't know this, your stats sheet, where it says melee defense reduction and range defense reduction, actually goes to the max for a short duration. This makes him incredibly tanky. If this tier list was about safe breakers for getting your first clears or safe breakers for learning the game, he would be up there. He is very good at that. But in a speedrun setting, he doesn't do damage. He doesn't bring anything that Nova Breaker doesn't bring. And he has really quirky interactions with his recoil stun, one of his best upgrades, which lets him apply shock with it. Has a drawback of if the boss leaves that circle, it'll then take shock off the target, which means the boss will diminishing return faster and go immune. He really needs a love, he really needs rework, and I really hope that one day we can put him next to Quake and be saying, wow, this breaker is great. Next up, we have Toast. Toast is going to sit comfortably in the B tier. Toast is fine. Like, outside of a speedrun setting, he is fine. There's a meme going around where people saying buff Toast, buff Toast, buff Toast, but he's honestly just fine. Not everything about this game needs to be done in a speedrun, but when you're comparing him to others in a speedrun, he doesn't do anything that they don't do better. So his best weapon is a weapon build. Why take him when you can take a liner? He's based around burn, so that means he falls off on Protean. He has access to the Venom caster, sorry, but so does Quake. It's like, why would you really take him? But his damage isn't terrible. You can take Venom caster, take some attack speed, like through buying it in the run, get his attack power buffs, and just let him really go off. He's just not going to be quick. Now, if we talk about Rush sits comfortably in front of Toast. It's unfair to Rush, really. It's not his fault. It's that he's like this, but anything Rush does, Quake can do better. As well as the fact that Rush is also bugged to the point where if you put a ranged weapon on him, you have to be ramming your face into the boss for you to really be able to utilize it. You'll notice sometimes your weapon just won't be doing damage. This is only fixed by reloading and then running around for a bit, or ramming your face into the boss and firing and hoping it goes. This can be really annoying and not really fun or interactive. Couple that with the fact that he is just a worse Quake. He has an identity crisis. He's got a problem now, and it's all because this guy was brought into the game. Uzi is the epitome of identity crisis. Uzi in the early game can do great damage with a skill build and can do great damage with a weapon build. She can bring mediocre buffs to her team as well as freeze. The issue with this is, once you start scaling her up into the later game, so you get onto like the later planets, her damage just hits a wall, and it makes it harder to push. This really pulls her back and stops her being a great breaker for speedrunning, due to the fact that it's hard to push over those boundaries where you need your damage to be pumping to a certain degree to be able to skip phases. Well, for this reason alone, it's impossible to rate her higher. Coupling that with the fact that because she's mediocre damage in both weapon and skill, means that she doesn't have an identity. This means it's hard to really get her to like go without getting something insane. They really need to just rework Uzi and make her either skill or weapon, and try not to do this thing where they give breakers a little bit of both, because then it just holds them back, makes runs inconsistent, and it's really hard to really have fun in a speedrun when you just have all these glaring issues. She's a fun breaker in seasonal and a fun breaker just to play the game casually, but as soon as you put her in these environments where you're wanting to actually speedrun and try and push on leaderboards, she will never be a good contender. And that's true in both multiplayer and solo, unfortunately. Anyway, this is my tier list. This is my list on just solo speedrunning. I'm going to disclaimer here again. I really don't like tier lists. They don't really show how the game really functions. For example, if this was a multiplayer tier list, Bronzy would be up here. You would see Lightning, like all this would still be up here, but Bronzy would be in S tier as well. Quake would be up in S tier maybe. Draken would actually drop down to B tier because the fact now he has to rely on allies, which means they're having to wait because they need bleed to be on the target. Like there's a lot of things that would just shift around, and this is why it's not a good representation of how things function within games. But it was requested, and I have delivered one. But I hope this gives you some sort of idea now what the meta kind of looks like for solo speedrunning. If you want to know how to do any of the stuff on these breakers that I've mentioned, I have various videos on the channel where I play some of these in solo extreme, sorry, and utilize these tricks to do things. They're not all speedruns, some of them are just getting it clear. But anyway, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe, etc. All that YouTube algorithm stuff. And let me know below in the comments if you would rate anything differently from your own personal experiences within speedrunning. Thank you very much. See ya.